could just give the facts and that would be enough to persuade people. And it may surprise you to hear that this is a very old attitude. You can go all the way back to Aristotle, almost 2,500 years, and you can see that attitude in his writing where he's saying, well, you know, it would be good if logos were the only thing we needed, but since, you know, people are so flawed, we have to get down in the mud and deal with ethos and pathos. I don't see it that way. I see ethos and pathos as very valuable adjuncts to argument. So that's another kind of important thing to understand. And one of the reasons it's important to understand those things is that when you ask someone what they know about a scientific idea, one of the things you're actually asking them is, whose team are you on? That's often what people hear when you talk about a charged scientific issue. So the bottom line is that scientific findings, like everything else, are going to be debated in human terms. And you'll be a lot happier if you can accept that. We're going to have to account for things like group identities, values, emotions, that kind of thing. In this presentation, you'll see a lot of examples from climate change communication, mainly because that's where my research is, although COVID stuff has been creeping in over the past few years. I read, I want to say millions because it feels like millions, but thousands of words every day of scientific communication. I don't think a single day goes by where I don't read at least half a dozen public-facing arguments about science, usually many more than that. I don't necessarily recommend that. So if we have time and you're interested after the presentation, ask me about my emerging insights about scientific communication out of the COVID pandemic. I'd love to talk about that with you if there's time and interest. So let's talk about what we can and can't do today. One thing that we're going to have trouble doing is switching PowerPoint slides. I can. Yeah, if you would you? Yeah, maybe just hit the right arrow keys. There we go. Okay. Yeah. So here's what I can and can't. Yeah, if you want to hit the.
Oh, okay.
Thank you, Aaliyah. Thank you so much. Yeah. So here's what I can and can't do. The first thing that I cannot do is teach you everything you need to know about persuasion or offer you set formulas on how you talk to a skeptical audience. These skills are taught and learned over a lifetime. And anyway, you are not starting from a blank slate. You already know a lot about persuasion. You wouldn't be where you are if you didn't know a lot about persuasion and interacting with people. Here's what I can do. I can enhance your judgment. I can add new options and ideas to your repertoire so that when you're in a new or a difficult situation, you'll have more things to draw on, more tools in your tool belt. Another thing I cannot do is teach you how to win against a skeptical audience. We'll talk about this more in a minute, but or a deceiver who's spreading misinformation or disinformation. It just doesn't work like that. We're not Jedis whipping a lightsaber around, rhetorically speaking. I wish that were the case. It isn't. Let's just take a minute and imagine that. Where it was that simple. It's a much longer, more gradual process. So combating misinformation and persuading skeptics are really unglam activities for the most part. So what I can do is give you tools to change minds over time. Help you persuade primary and secondary audiences, that kind of thing. Another thing I can't do is prevent you from making mistakes, enemies, and generally sometimes thinking after an interaction, I don't want to live on this planet anymore. That's going to happen at one point or another. What I can do is help you see persuading skeptical audiences as a lifelong project that requires that you fail and learn from failure, which can be joyful, even if it's frustrating. So mistakes and failure are inevitable. You're not Tony Fauci or Jennifer Lawrence, and that may be a good thing, or Jennifer Lawrence's character in Don't Look Up. I mean, you're going to do things your way, and that's good too. That's a positive thing. Last thing I cannot do is change human nature, fortunately. I can't change the fact that humans are selfish, and short-sighted, and tribal, and don't cooperate nearly as well as we could. Further, we don't do well at maintaining an emergency state. Human psychology is not built for that. We didn't evolve to be that way. It isn't good for us, and that's okay. So what I can do is encourage you to accept humans for what we are. We have a lot of potential. We do amazing things. We can have and do set aside our personal interests for the good of others. That has not gone away. It's not going away. Once you choose to accept this, by which I mean the flaws of humanity as very flawed creatures, you can quit being surprised or outraged. This insight came to me a couple of years ago, and it's been really transformative for me personally in my life. Life is so much easier, less energy intensive, if you just accept that people are the way that they are. Then you're not shocked at all ever. And that energy can be redirected into other more enjoyable things than bemoaning how shitty humans are in general. So let's hop in. Controversial science. What makes science controversial? Well, it isn't because people don't understand science. I think we think that a lot. If only people understood, then all of our problems would go away. But when you look at the empirical research on what happens when you have a disinformation campaign or a deep disagreement a deep disagreement in public that doesn't seem to fit with the level of consensus about the science. So the science seems pretty clear on something, but people are really divided on it. What's with that? Well, if you look at it, what you find is that the people who are disagreeing with the scientific consensus actually have a high degree of science literacy. That's why they're able to function in that way. They understand scientific terminology, they can use it, but that means that they may also be able to exploit it. They may be able to take what is really a very marginal uncertainty and stretch it so that it seems like a 50-50 uncertainty when it's really not. Dan Kahan with the Yale Climate Communication Project, I think that's the name of it. I don't know if that's still going or not, but it is. That's good to hear. Some of the research that comes out of there is some of the best stuff I've read on climate communication. But that was mainly out of his research that he's able to find. And I'll give you some citations for that if you want to read more, which I recommend. The other thing that makes scientific findings controversial is that scientific findings often lead, even if only implicitly, toward public policies we don't like. And I don't think I really have to explain that often that is greater government regulation of industries and individuals. And there are other things that we disagree on, but that's really the big one. So that's what makes science controversial. I feel long-term dissatisfied with that word because there's something not right about the flavor of it, but I think that's good enough to be going on with. So let's think for a minute about skepticism and argument. I want to do a thought experiment with you. I want you to, you can hit the next slide and go to the first question. So I want you to take a minute and think, when was the last time that someone changed your mind with an argument? Take a minute and think about it. Do you have one in mind? Maybe? Now let's level this up. When was the last time that someone changed your mind with an argument to the degree that you admitted you were wrong and disavowed a position you had previously taken in front of other people? Can you think of a time that happened? willing to share one, either for the first one or the second one. Yeah.
What counts as an audience? Just like another person?
Well, what I'm trying to get at with that is just that it's kind of face threatening to admit you're wrong in front of other people. So really any audience would do.
Mine was kind of a small thing, but
That's
my sister
okay.
and I were talking about like what is healthy food and what's not, and about like the different greens that have the most nutrient. And I was like, it's obviously kale and spinach. She's like, no, it's romaine. It's romaine lettuce. And I was like, hard put. That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. And then we looked it up, and I was like, okay, well, yeah. I was
So
wrong.
romaine does have a nutritional value?
Yeah.
It does. Is it better than kale?
Yeah.
What?
Yeah.
Okay. We're gonna need a minute to recover from this.
But yeah, so that was the moment where I was like, yeah.
What did you say to her later?
We laugh about it like all the time.
Did you call her up and say, hey, you were right?
We were on the phone still. This was happening.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Just like, oh, yeah, I'm wrong. Like that's just blatantly wrong.
What a healthy sibling relationship that they have. It's nice.
I don't remember specifics, but it was actually on Facebook. And I was arguing heatedly about basically the Afghanistan pullout. And, you know, it went into the realm of like, if only Trump were still president, this wouldn't have happened kind of thing. And I backtracked on some of the things I said because, you know, I think I took stock of my own investment in the whole last 20 years of that war and, you know, having not served personally, you know, I felt like I was going to defer to people who knew more about some things than I did. So there were aspects of that argument that I backtracked on and said that I was wrong and sorry. All that on Facebook.
You're changing our culture one post at a time. Setting a magnificent example. I saw a hand over here.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess this wasn't like a huge argument. I was just texting my friend this morning, and this might lead to an argument between all of us. I was telling her how like annoyed I was that we only got 4 tests. Like the government sent us only 4, and really my only reasoning was emotional and like that. What if a family has like 5 kids? Like what do they do? And she like has her master's in public policy, so she knows like a lot. And she was like, well, this is why it's really complicated. This is why they can't send more. And yeah, it changed my mind. I was like, okay, like it is from like what her arguments were. I was like, okay, it's the best that they could do, like with what they had. So
It's wonderful that you can have an expert, you know, and be persuaded. I love having experts in my life on different topics like that.
yeah, it was really interesting.
I was recently persuaded, and this has to do with what you were saying about thinking about how, you know, my investments in something. And I was reading about, you know, the empirical comparisons between reinfection rates among people who are vaccinated versus people who have had a natural infection. And I'm a very liberal person, and I've been pretty caught up in this to the degree that I was ready to argue that no, it can't possibly be as good or comparable, and the people who want to argue that natural infection should exempt them from a second dose or a booster are being assholes, right? But I listened to a presentation of the science, and I was like, okay, no, I'm not sure about that at all. It doesn't seem like that is really, at my level of certainty or disposition is warranted at all. I'm not sure that the final answer is in on that, but it's a lot more ambiguous than I thought when I listened to someone who's qualified to actually lay out the scientific debate. So it doesn't, you know, when I ask this question, it isn't usually a flood. And in fact, today it's been a little bit different than what usually happens because often I hear about people and their spouses, which I love because it means that people are letting their spouses convince them that they're wrong and they're admitting that they're wrong. That's a really good ingredient for a healthy relationship. But siblings kind of comes close too, right? The people who are closest or intimate with us. It's really very healthy. I like to be able to say, oh shit, we should have done what you said. I was wrong, you were right. It almost lifts a weight off of your chest when it's the case, and when it really is the case that you were wrong. But I'm a weirdo, I'm sorry to say. I don't think that's a broadly shared thing. So you could take this as bad news about rhetoric and argument, and in my darker moments I think, oh geez, does this mean that argument doesn't actually work? But then I pull back and I say, no, I prefer to interpret the difficulty that we have coming up with examples of when we have changed our minds publicly about something. I choose to interpret that thusly. Arguments do work. People do change their minds. It doesn't happen like it does on TV, right? Where somebody's on the stand in Law and Order and they, I did it, I killed him. That just doesn't really happen in real life. People don't do that. They're guarded. It's face-threatening to admit you're wrong. So people aren't going to do it unless they really feel comfortable or they really feel like they don't have any other choice. So the way that people change their minds is much more like erosion. It happens slowly and over time and gradually, in a good way. It's good erosion. Though occasionally there are dramatic moments, and probably the one type of argument that changes people's mind more quickly than any other type of argument, in my opinion, as an argumentation theorist, is embodied argument. When people are making an argument that stems from who they are. So I'll give you an example. I think probably coming out is one of the most powerful arguments for human rights that we've ever seen, in that you're standing there and you're coming out about a marginalized identity and that's me, I'm that. Did anybody watch the interview last year between Leslie Stahl and it's Lynn Cheney, right? Who's the current, who's on the January 6th? Liz, thank you, yeah. Did anybody see the interview between Liz Cheney and Leslie Stahl on 60 Minutes? So Leslie Stahl is asking Liz Cheney about her sister, who's openly gay, and Liz's previous very public opposition to same-sex marriage. And Liz Cheney said, this is Liz Cheney, said, I was wrong. I was wrong about same-sex marriage, about all of it. And Leslie Stahl was taken aback. She said, I wasn't expecting that. I wasn't expecting it either, to be honest with you. So it does happen, it can happen, but it usually isn't that dramatic. It's one of the takeaways here. So these are some of the conditions that you need to know going in to communicating controversial science, whether you're talking or writing, whether you're dealing with a local politician or a senator, whether you're in front of Congress or at the Thanksgiving table. It isn't like it is on TV. It happens slowly, gradually. That's okay. That's the way that it works. So what I'm going to do is offer you 6 principles for communicating controversial science with skeptical audiences. And I do have an outline that I'll give you after the talk, so don't freak out if you're taking notes and not getting there. It's okay to relax and just listen. So the first principle is to take a broad view of audience. When we think about an audience, right, you said audience.
My boyfriend is also in the car.
Yeah, you say, I'm in the car, like that, is that really an audience, right? That's not very many people, and it's people I know. But the truth is that audiences look a lot of different ways, and an audience can be one person. Even though our image of audience is like people sitting in the agora, right, where the Greeks went to make arguments and decisions, or it's always an auditorium that I think of. I think of a podium and an auditorium. What happens in my brain when I think audience? So you may think of the person sitting across from you, the people questioning you, the person disagreeing with you. But the key to this principle is that you're looking around. Are there others in the room present here? Will others encounter the document that you're producing? Are there journalists present? Consider these as secondary audiences. Many years ago, I worked with a human rights group in Ohio, and some folks in the organization, this was back in the early aughts, right after Ohio had banned same-sex marriage. So they didn't quite know what to do. Or they did know what to do, I didn't know what to do. I thought, geez, this same-sex marriage ban passed so overwhelmingly. What are we gonna do to persuade? And they had a plan. They're like, we're gonna persuade Ohioans, this was in Ohio, on issues that we already agree on, for the most part. So they did public polling about lesser, well, lesser's not the right word, other issues other than marriage. Things like hospital visitation rights. So they were able to show that a majority of Ohioans already agree that a same-sex partner should be allowed in the hospital room if their partner is, severely ill or ill at all. And that you shouldn't be fired from your job for being LGBTQ. Most Ohioans already in 2004 agreed to that. They were interacting with a state senator who was not only anti-gay, she had campaigned on being anti-gay. Her campaign was so nasty that there was an article about it in the Village Voice, of all places. And this is an Ohio state senator, not an Ohio senator. So they were talking with her, and she was, as you might imagine, balking at anything, and was saying, that she didn't believe in something called carve-outs, which I guess is a quota thing. I'm not sure what the relevance was. But the moral of the story was that they had this frustrating interaction with this person who was so clearly opposed to them and so clearly not persuadable. But after the meeting, they walked out and they were approached by some of her staffers who said, who were younger, who said, like, we get what you're trying to say. Like, we don't think that she gets what you're trying to say. She doesn't understand that you're not talking about what she thinks you're talking about. So we will talk with her. We will keep talking with her about this issue because we see where you're coming from. They were delighted at this. And the lesson coming out of it was that it wasn't really the primary audience that they needed to worry about. It was the secondary audience, those staffers that were in the background. I'll give you another example. Who here watched the most recent presidential debates? I'm sorry to hear that. It was not the funnest set of debates I'd ever watched. But you'll notice that Biden, who I'm sure was coached to do this, kept turning away from the person he's debating and looking toward camera and speaking to Americans. I'm worried about you, and you're at the kitchen table, and are you putting food on the table, and he keeps talking about an empty chair at the table. Biden knows that his audience is not the person he's arguing with, or the moderator. It's the people watching. If that sounds obvious to you, I can tell you that it's very easy to forget, especially when you're under stress and you're trying to look at this person and listen to this person. You're naturally going to kind of tune out other people. But if you take a broad view of audience, it will help you reach people you might not be able to reach. So the second principle, right, if we're talking about take a broad view of audience, you want to also take a broad view of argument. We often think about, that looks good, it looks like cold, refreshing water. We often think about argument in terms of winning and losing. So it's like a zero-sum game. And since, as we know, and you already knew, winning in the sense of a dramatic reversal is pretty rare, just because it's face-threatening to be asked to change your mind in the moment. So we have to find other ways to lower the face threat of an argument. And we have to think more broadly and realistically about what a single interaction can actually do. Because if you go in to an interaction with somebody who's skeptical or hostile or something like that, and if you go into that, your vision of success is total surrender on their part, right? You've won, sir. I throw my sword at your feet. It's not going to happen. And if that's your vision of success, you're in for just a miserable time because you're always going to be thinking, oh God, I failed. Why won't this work? These people. So here's some other things that arguments can do. One, a good argument can make it possible for skeptics to consider alternatives. You can demonstrate that you hear their objections, you don't look down on them, you're genuinely trying to respond to them. Another thing that an argument can do that's not winning or defeating someone is establish and maintain communication. Show someone, even if they don't agree with you, that you can be a resource, or connect them with other resources if that's more appropriate to the occasion. But they can see that there's a person there who they could talk to later, or read the work of later if they begin to become more persuadable. If they're a journalist, being a resource for a journalist is not hard. Answer their emails and return their calls. And you will find that, sorry, I was trained as a journalist originally, but before I was a rhetorician, I was a journalist. And I would happily talk to the people who would communicate back with me quickly and in a friendly way. Another thing that argument can do, short of total defeat, is it can create a willingness to enter into a common effort to solve a common problem. So you can help people see, look, we really disagree about this, but actually our goals are pretty similar. We want X, Y, and Z, yeah? So focusing in on where there is overlap, where there is agreement. Kathleen Hall, speaking of presidential debates, there's a communications scholar, if you've heard of factcheck.org, she's the one who founded it, Kathleen Hall Jamieson, rhetorician. If you ever want a list of rhetoricians who've done amazing things, just ask. Turning the tide of the Civil War, rhetorician. It's Chamberlain from Maine at Battle of Gettysburg. Anyway, so forgive me. Kathleen Hall Jamieson said that a better way to watch a presidential debate is look at the places where they agree. She was saying this in 2006. I don't know if that still is relevant, but it is a more interesting way to read an argumentative exchange. What do people actually agree on? Good to find out. The fourth thing an argument can do, short of total victory, is that you can gain a greater understanding of your opponent's beliefs and also your own. So you can be open to what somebody's saying, even if it seems angry or harsh. And if you ask the right questions, you may learn something about the source of their skepticism. There may be group identifications or concerns driving it. So you can be picking up the raw material for future arguments. Or just learning more about the world. The trick is to be sincere when you're doing this. So tell me about how you came to believe that, or tell me about why you think that, or when you learned that, or something like that, right? And let people tell you about it if they're willing to tell you about it. A lot of these are from a theory called Rogerian rhetoric, based on the work of the psychoanalyst Carl Rogers. And they were originally intended for person-to-person exchanges, but work perfectly well in other kinds of exchanges other than those. So I'll add a fifth. I think that if you could do nothing else in an argument, you can defy expectations. It matters if somebody meets a scientist and sees that, or a researcher I should say, and sees that they are not mad, bad, or ignorant, or arrogant, excuse me. Don't underestimate the value of that kind of ambassadorial work that you can do out there every day in unexpected ways. All right, third principle would be to pivot towards shared values. Now, I see this advice given all the time. Raise your hand if you've received this advice at some point. Okay, a couple people. So maybe it isn't. Maybe it's familiar to some folks, less so to others. If you go to a training with, if you go to a science communication conference, for example, you're likely to see this advice being given. I was at a conference in Minnesota, a communicating science conference. Speaking Science, I think is the one that it's called. But they had those sketch artists for all the panels. And so I walked around looking at all the different sketches, and I kept seeing that over and over and over again. Shared values, shared values. And I realized that if someone asked me, what is a value? What is a value? I wouldn't actually know how to answer that question. So I did what anybody would do. I went to the library and picked up some nice, heavy Belgian post-World War II argumentation and philosophy texts. Right? That's what you do. I assume. So here's the answer. According to argumentation theorists, Values differ from facts, truths, and presumptions because they aren't, quote, characterized by the agreement of the universal audience. I just really like that terminology. But to put that in plain English, we use the term value to refer to things that we presume will be important to some people and not to others. Values differ from facts or truths, which we presume to be a matter of agreement among everyone, or that they should be, right? That we consider something a fact or a truth if we think the evidence is strong enough that if given that evidence, nearly everyone should agree to it. Now, they don't in practice, but that's how you think of a fact or a truth. Values, not the case. Another way to think about this is facts are what we know, values are what we care about. And there are different types of values. I can't even remember. Yeah, let's see. Oh, yeah, there we go. You're doing great. I'm very grateful. Yeah. So there are concrete values, which are things that you can see and touch or measure. Things like, living beings, specific groups, particular objects, especially those that are unique objects. So examples of a concrete value would be something like France, the North Platte watershed, polar bears, Catholic Church, clean air, those kinds of things, very measurable. Abstract values, which is what you usually hear about when you hear about values, should be more familiar. These are much more amorphous, less defined ideas like truth, justice, peace, etc. Some values these are not platonically separated categories. Some values are hard to sort, and don't be discouraged by that. Like a good example would be wilderness. So that's a very abstract value because it's something does this land feel wild, right? But you could also measure it with something like biodiversity or light pollution or noise pollution or stuff like that to decide whether something or not is wilderness. There are also personal values like money, prestige, autonomy. There are shared values, truth, justice, etc. We'll come back to this in our activity in the second half of our workshop, but these are just meant to give you some idea of what values are. Here's the thing. Value conflicts don't happen because people disagree about values. And you already know this. Because when you're arguing that something is an equal right or about freedom, right? So you're confronted with a group of people who are pissed about masks, saying, what about our freedom? You're not going to say, well, I don't like freedom. I hate freedom, F freedom, right? Maybe if you're really, really, really irate, you might go away. But, the truth is you're going to interpret what freedom means differently. You might be thinking about freedom as, okay, that we can that we can keep something open or keep something functioning if the science supports using masks to do that. So values require interpretation. Freedom can mean different things and support different courses of action. Depends on how you invoke the value. The second really important insight about values that makes pivot towards shared values a useful thing, but a thing that is a lot less simple than it sounds, is that values exist in hierarchies. And they override each other at different points for different people. Seatbelts is a great example, right? So for me, personally, I think seatbelt laws are a great idea because it's demonstrably true that they save lives. The arguments against them were pretty flimsy. So for me, safety would override freedom. There's an example of a place in my thinking where it does. For you, it might override at a different point. So maybe it flips when you get to helmet laws with motorcycles, right? Maybe then you're like, well, people want to ride a motorcycle and not wear a helmet. That's on them. That may be the way that you go. Notice that vaccination is shifting the values for a lot of people, right? You heard it in our governor's, Jared Polis's words. He got in a little bit of, not trouble, but his spokesperson came around and qualified what he said because he told Colorado Public Radio that if at this point you haven't gotten vaccinated, it's your own damn fault. And then they came around, well, hold on a minute. But that's what he said. Value hierarchies shift, interpretations differ. That's where the conflict comes from. We'll spend quite a lot of time on this in the second part, but I just want to show you a quick example of what this looks like. So this is a climate change communicator. What I found is often we have to start by talking about values, the things we care about, that we share. And by building on a foundation of shared values, such as the future of today's children, or even the ability to enjoy hiking, skiing, and the threat to those things posed by climate change. Can you guess where she was when she made this argument?
Colorado.
Boulder. Yeah. Yeah, so you can see that this person has a lot of experience talking about values, such that they're actually shifting the values they put at the top, or the values that they mention by name, toward those that they assume that the local audience would resonate with them. You probably already do this. Again, this is something you know, but it actually helps to know that this is a thing that you do. Here's another example of the strategy, and I want you to notice how the writer blends both large-scale and small-scale signs of climate change. Let's see. Oh, I'm sorry, I skipped. This is the fourth principle. Wherever possible, make your signs present for your audience. It's about making something present through verbal magic alone, right? So you're using, I mean, if you can bring it with you, do, but if you can't, use your words. You can also help people observe science on their own, or observe whatever phenomena you study on their own. You can tell them where they can see it. Make them everyday observers. Here's where the example comes in. Is it on that slide? Yes. We see our plants and our flowers and our bushes flowering earlier in the year. We see birds and animals and insects much further north than they've ever been before. We see that sea level is rising, glaciers are melting, our weather patterns are changing. A colleague of mine in science communication, Justin Mandow, studied the fracking debates in western Pennsylvania, the Marcellus Shale. That was when I was in Pittsburgh. And when he watched the local debates about fracking, he noticed that the people who were doing the argument were working really hard to make environmental impacts more present for the audience. So they did things like use concrete place names. They invoked visual detail. They drew on first-person reporting. They invited those who have extended familiarity with a place, maybe somebody who's lived in that place all their life, come and bear witness to what you have seen. So there are a lot of techniques we can use to make science present, but there is a hazard here. Let's see if it's, but yes. So one of the problems with the strategy is that it can oversimplify scientific findings. To take another example from climate science, scientists in that field have spent a lot of time trying to help people understand the difference between climate and weather. So weather being what's happening outside right now, climate being a long-term statistical model. So, oh, by the way, this is happening right now. This morning I was reading about Joe Rogan and Jordan Peterson having a discussion about climate change modeling or climate modeling. And Jordan Peterson, who's something of a polarizing figure, to put it mildly, says that it's too complex. He's Canadian. It's too complex. We can't model it, you know. And you can imagine that climate scientists had quite a lot to say about that idea, and say they did. But the point here is that the hazard is always that people will look at the wrong things. So this is Senator James Inhofe, a pretty famous climate denier, senator from Oklahoma, brought in a very famous instance, brought a snowball to the Senate floor. Global warming, look at all the snow. So you have to be careful. Fifth principle is to think long term. Take the long view, long view. This one is more philosophical than the others, and it's where my research as previously a Socius resident fellow took me. If you read the work that is listed in the handout, you can get a good sense of what this perspective looks like in greater detail. But basically what I mean by long view is thinking outside of the interaction that you're in. Rather than think, how do I win this argument? You would consider how your statements and argumentative strategies would affect public views about science and scientists if they circulated widely. In other words, if how I'm talking about science or research becomes how the way the public understood it, is that good or bad? What would be the consequences of that? So here's an example of an argument made to a religious audience about the idea that only hippies care about climate change or environmental degradation. So this is by the way from the same person who gave the other examples. Bike to work, hug a tree, eat granola, live off the grid, wear hemp, bathe in a stream, and worship the earth. We often find ourselves labeled just because we think global warming is a serious problem people should know about. We, in rhetorical theory, call this identification, and it's got a fancy name, but you already do it all the time. When you are speaking with someone, you're trying to make consubstantiality present. I'm like you. I'm made out of the same things that you are made out of. So therefore, you can hear me more clearly, which is all well and good. Totally bog standard technique for persuasion. We do it all the time. But here's where the long view comes in. The implicit claim is, we're like you. We also think those granola people are really effing silly. It might be good in the moment. The writer of this passage is trying to make an appeal to conservative religious audiences, and that's where the text that they're writing in is geared toward. It makes sense, but it's not good on the long view. It's not healthy. It reinforces stereotypes by dissing people who care about the environment. It disparages different ways of thinking. And when you get right down to it, why would worshiping the earth be any less legitimate than worshiping Yahweh from the perspective of taking action on environmental sustainability? I can't think of a good reason. They both seem like equally acceptable options to me if we're talking about motives. All right, last principle. Don't get too strategic. Don't try to outwit your audience. They will smell it from a mile away, unless you're really, 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 really good. And if you're that good, I'm nervous for you. So I mentioned the idea of mutual understanding when I started the talk as a kind of goal. And here's the distinction. There's at least two kinds of rhetoric. There's communicative rhetoric. I was like, which one's first? Communicative rhetoric on the one hand, and strategic rhetoric on the other. And the difference is easiest to understand if you think about safe sex education. I went to Catholic school, so it was pretty interesting. I wish I could go back and listen to it again, but I would have a hard time shutting up. Hold on a minute, wait on a minute. So here's why safe sex education is a good example of communicative versus strategic rhetoric. In communicative rhetoric, we would trust the audience, we would seek mutual understanding, we would provide reasons and evidence, even if they don't support the argument or the thing that we're trying to get people to do. Whereas in strategic rhetoric, we would focus on getting people to do what we want. That would be our overriding goal, which means that we would omit evidence and reasons if they work against that behavioral modification. And hang on this one because it's a fun reveal, but it can really bite you in the ass, or come back to haunt you. So safe sex education, when you are educating young people about sex, and particularly about sexual transmitted infection and sexual ethics, and your primary goal is to discourage the onset of sexual activity for as long as you possibly can, ideally until marriage if you're in Catholic school, you're going to pick your evidence because you're going to pick all the gruesome pictures. You're going to talk about antibiotic-resistant gonorrhea. You're going to talk about all the horrible things that could happen. You're going to omit a lot of things. When I was much, much older than when I was in Catholic school, I had the opportunity to chat with somebody who knew a lot about HIV. And they told me some things that just shocked me. And one of their arguments was that HIV is deadly and you should do everything you can to avoid it, or it can be deadly, and you don't want it being the point. It's a survivable, treatable illness now, thank God. But he was saying that it actually isn't all that easy to catch from one interaction. That doesn't mean that you wouldn't want to take precautions in one interaction, but growing up in school, I came to think that if you had unprotected sex once, boom, forget it. You're going to definitely get the virus if the other person had it. Not the case. Now you can you hear my hesitation? To tell you, can you hear how many qualifiers I'm adding to this? No, that doesn't mean, hold on a minute, don't go out and behave irresponsibly. You can see, because I'm worried for you. I don't want to give you advice that would hurt you, even implicitly. So that's the kind of thing that could pull you towards strategic rhetoric. Like, well, let's tell them what they need to know so they'll behave in a way that would be safe. But communicative rhetoric is better because people react to strategic argument with strategic listening. They know you've left out something, because you always leave out something, right? Because they know that you want something from them. They want you to do something, or you want them to do something. We have very recently gotten an object lesson in the downsides of strategic rhetoric. And here's New York Times coverage of a tweet from former Surgeon General Jerome Adams, the beginning of the pandemic. Seriously, people, stop buying masks, the Surgeon General Jerome M. Adams said in a tweet on Saturday morning. They are not effective in preventing general public from catching coronavirus, but if healthcare providers can't get them to care for sick patients, it puts them and our communities at risk. Can anybody spot the contradiction? Really, I mean, what is it? What is it?
So they're not effective, but then he says they're effective.
Yeah, that was the first thought I had reading this tweet. Well, hold on a minute. If they're not effective for the general public, why would medical professionals want them? And the answer is, I think the implicit argument is that, well, the general public doesn't know how to use masks. But the answer to that is teach them how to use masks, right? You wouldn't just give up on something because people don't know right off the bat how to do it. His real goal is clear. We cannot have a run on masks by the general public. We really, really, really need PPE for the medical professionals. But you can almost read his mind through the tweet. He doesn't think this will be persuasive enough. So he wants to add another reason, and it's not a very good one, and it's weak, and you can see through it right away. And now we're in this situation where people have this recourse. Well, but didn't Fauci say, didn't he say that masks weren't effective? Not quite. Yeah?
I feel like with these, whether or not they're effective strategies, kind of depends whether you're arguing with somebody or against somebody, because it seems like people are really willing to accept arguments that are omitting all kinds of stuff if it validates their own bias, or opinion.
Certainly.
But like, it's only the other people that they're quick to be like, well, wait a minute, like you're omitting something. I feel like it's kind of interesting, just an observation.
I have a really good example of that. There's a guy on YouTube, you're headed for reliable information. The sentence starts that way. This guy on YouTube who I really like, and every day, he reviews all the latest findings. And I was nervous about him at first because he was on YouTube. His name is John Campbell. He's a British, I think he's a doctor of nursing maybe, or is it I don't know, it doesn't matter. He had a video called Debunking the Debunking of Ivermectin. And I thought, oh boy. So I gotta watch this and see if he's a crank. Because I liked his other videos. And it turned out what he was saying wasn't that ivermectin was good. He was saying, ivermectin is not a crazy drug. We use it all the time. It's good for treating parasites. And the journalistic coverage of why ivermectin is not something we want to use for COVID-19 was really deceptive and omitted this and failed to mention this and exaggerated this and all this stuff. That's what he was doing, right? And that's what I was doing. I thought, oh boy. But then when he went into it, I thought, okay, yeah, you're right. That is a strategic argument, and we really want to be more communicative, which was what he was trying to do. But I was all ready to to dismiss him because he was being communicative and not strategic. Because like you said, I was already on his side, or already on the side of dismissing ivermectin as a treatment. In any case, that's a nice way to round out that actually. So those are the 6 principles, and I'll send this around now, which has a list and also has the activity, one of the activities we'll be doing this afternoon. Thank you. But we have a little bit of time before, what time do we have lunch scheduled for?
I think, well, we can do it whenever we want, because
Oh, okay.
it's here, so.
Oh, great. Well,
Totally flexible.
did anybody have any questions? Or what questions do you have? A lot of information to process. Yeah.
I guess just, I don't know, from your perspective, you were, at the very beginning, you said you could either win an argument with rhetoric, or you could win an argument with violence.
Well, you
So
would be
where-
winning an argument with violence, you'd just be, right? I mean, is violence an argument, maybe?
Well, I
Anyway,
just-
go on.
I just meant like, where does, like, does logic fall under the umbrella of rhetoric in your opinion? Like in what you're talking with us about?
There's a way that this could be an arcane disciplinary question, but I promise I will try to not make it that. Socrates and Plato seem to say no. Contemporary rhetoricians say yes. That you could never exclude things like logic or dialectic from rhetoric because that's one of the most basic ways we persuade people. I'm pretty sure Aristotle would have included it there as well, although he made that nominal distinction. But yes, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah.
I feel like in science communication, we're often told to like simplify our message to make it more understandable for our audiences, but that often feels like it makes it hard to be a communicative rhetoric, to like show that kind of gray area. I'm just interested in your kind of comments on that and like where those kind of meet.
Yeah, I fall into the Gould school of science communication. I don't think simplify is the right word. I prefer translate or recontextualize. Ultimately, I think our task, so when I teach science writing over in the English department, I teach a upper division, like a 300 level course on that. And the way that I frame it is this. What you're dealing with is not simplification, it's about selecting information, what information is most important for my audience and how do I convey that. It's about reordering that information. So the information that needs to come first in a scientific article is very different from the information that ought to come first in a public-facing discussion. It's about being selective about which technical terminology needs to remain and which can be sacrificed in favor of more common sense alternatives. So I think it helps to think of it as translating or recontextualizing rather than simplifying or dumbing down. But the truth is that it's much harder to write a simple argument. When you look at people who are just gaining confidence in their discipline, like graduate students or early graduate students, their writing is much more complex than what you might find in somebody who's good at what they do and established. Not that the graduate student's doing a bad job, but typically with skill, you do move actually from technical and complex and dense to less so. That's why I try to think of it. Yeah.
I have kind of a similar question in terms of sort of joining both like the pivoting towards shared values point with the like taking the long view point, because I can see a situation where, you know, you're trying to connect with a certain audience, let's say a religious audience, so you use examples that you think, or, you know, contextualize your research with things that you think that religious audience would care about. But then in terms of like taking the long view, could that alienate like atheists from your argument? And so I guess I'm trying to think of how you can do both those things at the same time.
Well, they ought to be shared values, shared on both ends,
Yeah.
hopefully. So I mean, there's a sincerity component there that I would think would act as some filter. If you're a person of faith and you want to talk about how your faith informs your commitment to sustainability, I think you should. I think that's a nice thing to have in circulation. But if you're not a person of faith, don't pretend to be. That's actually this is a really smart question, because that's one of the main critiques that's raised against Rogerian argument, which was the basis of quite a lot of this, is, well, what do you do when you're arguing with people who are just effing evil, right? Are you going to concede that their position is seen as reasonable, right? So the example I like to use is you're arguing with somebody who wants to put all queer people on an island and nuke it, right? Now I can understand why you want to put all queer people on an island and nuke it. I mean, I can understand that, but have you considered, who's going to stage manage Beyonce? Like, who's going to, there's just a lot of problems that come with that. So, there's a limit to what you can do. And I think sincerity is the most operationalizable limit. If it isn't a value that you really authentically share, probably it's not going to work there. And I hope you don't share that value. Yeah.
I wanted to comment about the shared values thing
Yeah.
too. It's an integral part of one piece of my dissertation actually.
Oh yeah?
It looks like we're gonna get into that a little bit
Yep.
more later. But so I work in really a contentious area, and that is grazing, cattle grazing on public lands. And so my role is really not to be persuasive, but to be neutral, but to help others find those areas of shared values, right? And find consensus so that decisions can be made that meet the objectives of diverse people, stakeholders. So this idea of values, I was wondering if anyone else in here, because it seems like the way that you were presenting this is, the rhetoric and the persuasion, right? But I wonder I was curious if anyone else in the room is in a position like me where you actually are not the one to be persuasive, but to find consensus among diverse perspectives and values. Is anyone working in that? No.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, that's right.
Well, this is something new that I'm doing, but yeah, it's
okay.
fun to be in that position.
Okay. And so, anyway, I'm just kind of connecting what the principles, which are awesome, and these types of techniques to being in a position of that kind of balance point between two different sides, right?
Would it be fair to call that like a facilitator type
Yeah,
role?
exactly.
Would that be okay? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So if it were me,
Mm-hmm.
I would run screaming from the term neutral.
Okay.
I really would, because
Okay.
maybe it's useful as what we would call a counterfactual ideal, something you can never really achieve, but it's useful to strive toward.
Mhm.
So if that's what you're talking about, that's fine. But I would prefer something like fair to
Mhm.
neutral, because it isn't always, right? You can't always be neutral.
Well, no one is really neutral.
Well, if we ban from a public argument about an issue anyone who's not neutral, you're pretty much going to exclude all the experts on that issue, because if they're an expert on the issue, they're very unlikely to be neutral.
Right.
Is how that debate usually goes. When you're facilitating, you're still arguing, but you're arguing a different set of premises.
Mhm.
You're arguing these two parties, that it's possible for you to hear each other. It's
Mhm.
possible for you to reach a mutually agreeable set of options and outcomes, and et cetera. That's your argument,
Mhm.
maybe rather than the scientific evidence for X, Y, or Z
Got it,
is
got it.
conclusive. That might be one way of
Mhm.
drawing the connection that sounds like you're looking for.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I am currently teaching a 300 level class in the Human Dimension of Natural Resources Department on environmental conflicts. And a lot of that resonates with what I'm doing, and so it's like kind of going through, an environmental conflict, which
Mhm.
this is definitely one
Mhm.
that you're talking about, and kind of recognizing all the drivers of the conflict, and values are pretty much kind of the deeply rooted drivers of any type of environmental conflict, and then trying to figure out how to assess the situation, and that's when the kind of neutrality aspect comes in, and we're literally just doing that in class and like trying to do a conflict assessment and like looking at all those drivers, and then we're going to go to the part of negotiation, facilitation, persuasion, and all that. But the neutrality aspect is super interesting because we're all humans, right? We have biases, we come in with different values and all that, so it's very hard to kind of put that aside and really, assess the conflict
Mm-hmm.
with no biases and all that. So the point here is that a lot of the times it's really kind of acknowledging it, and owning it almost, that you're coming in with, your lenses and your own glass, your own glasses and your own worldview, right? And so, yeah, it's hard to, I see like the neutral position, but also acknowledge it and owning that you probably have your own opinion and your own position in that conflict or
Right.
whatever you're looking at, and trying to put those assumptions at the door and like leave them at the door and trying to have, that neutral.
Yeah, especially in the role of facilitator, if you're trying to help a group of people find consensus, I mean, it's none of my business, kind of. I'm here to be some form of an expert on the entire system, and then helping find consensus among the people that come to the table with the different values. But obviously, I mean, I'm wearing a cowboy hat, for goodness sake. Obviously, I'm gonna have my own opinions and values around the subject. So yeah, it's tricky, but this is really a neat perspective, and applying it to that scenario is really interesting.
I'll be very curious to hear what you think after we do the activity with the shared values and see if that plugs in there as well.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Yeah.
Continuing the shared values, I researched some of this too, and just for my own benefit, I was wondering if there's any research, like experimental maybe, that you've seen based off of this and the actual effects of it in changing people's attitudes.
Yeah, so it's really interesting to consider the quantitative-qualitative divide in environmental communication.
Yeah.
I think there's one thing that we have to be very proud of, which is that both types of work are published side by side in different journals. So environmental communication, which is where I published my piece, they have a policy where a quantitative person and a qualitative person review every submission. And the quantitative person had really helpful things to say about how to proceed. And what they really wanted was for me to talk about how quantitative work might, explain this. So I have read I haven't read any experimental work specifically on values, but I have read a lot of experimental work on, for example, can scientists be advocates? What do audiences make of, and they, like all the best work, the things they found were counterintuitive. For example, one study showed that audiences actually trusted scientists more when they were open about their commitments, which surprised me. The problem with looking at it as values is that it is an artificial situation. So in my own fields, back in the 60s and 70s, they were doing a lot of hypothetical questions, like what would you do in a situation in which, like, you talk about cognitive rhetoric here. And a lot of people argue that that was a mistake, because what you're asking people when you ask them, what would you do in this situation, the answer isn't what they'll do in the situation, it's what they think they would do in the situation. And so being able to isolate the variables in experimental communication research, you get a focus group, you have to control as much as you can, like any experiment. It just doesn't work that way in life, right? Public discourse is very slow, iterative effects on people. So I haven't, that kind of research is out there. Proceed with caution in applying directly the insights of that research to practice. I think they can I think the best thing that research does is upend a lot of our easy assumptions about what could work and what couldn't possibly work. When they say it could work, actually, it might work better than what you think. That to me is the central insight. But I haven't seen values used as a key term in that research. I have to go back and take another look. That would be the place to go to look. Environmental communication would be a nice starting point.
Yeah, that makes sense. I'm in political science, so I'm trying to argue that we do have shared values, and
Yeah.
that should be somewhere that we look. So having another field of study validate that would be useful. So
Yeah, I think framing is probably
Exactly.
another spot where you'd
Yeah.
see that kind of research going. They love that theory.
okay, thank you.
Yeah.
How do you differentiate between a value and an opinion?
I mean, I think of an opinion more as a propositional claim. I mean, you wouldn't need to really defend a value unless it were really, really, really out of whack. Like, if I put in my value hierarchy aesthetics above, like, human welfare, people would defend that, right? But usually if it's like, I really care about the Kashla watershed, people are not gonna be like, why? You know, I mean, maybe they will, but
So just in terms of like the language framing it is what it kind of.
I would say that an opinion is usually reducible to a propositional claim, whereas a value, if you reduce it to a propositional claim, it would usually be something like X, Y, or Z is important
Yeah.
because. So you could make it an argument, you could make it an opinion, but they're going to overlap. But that's where I see the difference. Yeah.
And just to add to that, I think values are deeper and less changing.
That's another good point. Yeah.
So like an opinion, you know, it's more of a surface belief that can, you know, based on information, you know, can change, but a value is something that I think, you know, developed probably early on, and, you know, it's, yeah, less malleable, I think, based on just day-to-day kind of like facts.
Yeah, I feel like whenever people ask me what like my values are, I always end up spitting out opinions on things instead. I think maybe it's just about like trying to figure out how to reword that so that it actually, yeah, conveys a value rather than an opinion.
Or it might be that's the most efficient way to bring your values across. It's by sharing your opinions. I mean, our opinions pretty well reveal our values in most cases.
Yeah, in the human dimensions of natural resources, again, we deal with that all the time, right? Because you can value certain things in the environment, and that what leads to certain actions, right? And so there's like kind of a pyramid of like values are at the bottom of the things, and they're more rare, and you kind of have those from an early age, and they're very hard to change because they're your core values. And then it goes up to like beliefs, and I think that those are kind of your more opinion type things that are influenced by your values. And the beliefs are kind of your fact, but from your own perspective. So it's your right and wrongs, you know, that's your truth, you know. And then you have the kind of attitudes and norms, and those are, again, influenced by your values and your beliefs. And that's the way that you act towards something, and it's more of an evaluation, like a positive or negative of something based on your values. And so the values are the things that rarely change, and that are, yeah, your kind of the core things that you truly believe in that will lead you to make evaluations or opinions on certain things in life.
I wouldn't worry too much about sorting things into platonically separate categorizations. Is this an opinion or is this a value? The only reason I care at all about distinctions like that is that they're useful. That reducing a set of beliefs or opinions or assertions or whatever down to the underlying values makes it really easy to formulate new ones that appeal to those values, or to identify where the values overlap. Or it's useful more than it is a specific, clearly delineated classification reflected in real world usage. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's like, I mean, instead of saying like plastic is bad, you'd say like, I value the health of the environment.
Well, plastic is bad, you know, I mean, plastic is bad.
Well, that's an opinion though, right?
There's a lot of
I was looking
values.
at this and I was like, okay, I should ask this question so I can start thinking about what my values are and contrast my opinions.
One distinction that the way values are defined, like in at least the papers that I read based on my study, is that that your values have a sociocultural context that is like that you are born into, that is not like your freedom and choice to go out and read about or learn about or create an opinion about. It's the inherent development of your sociocultural context, and it's inseparable from your sociocultural identity. And then there you go. So
Yeah,
that's just
that
another
makes me
way.
a little
That, yeah, that pyramid.
Elevate.
Yeah, what I was saying.
Yeah.
You said, I want to start thinking about what my values are. Clearly one of your values is planning for the future.
I just looked at this and I was like, and if I always do this thing where I'm like, what are my values, what are my opinions, what's the difference? But it's, when you think about it, yeah, I mean, obviously I understand like what a value is in contrast to an opinion, but I think just trying to figure out how to word those is like one of his definitions.
Well, use whatever definitions you find most valuable for sure. But I think we're probably hitting lunchtime. What time do we, I wonder if maybe folks are going to want to spread out more. Some folks do. What time should everybody be back and ready to go?
Again, up to you.
Oh,
We were
okay.
thinking
30
maybe of
minutes.
like,
30
what did we
minutes.
think, Laura, like half an hour for lunch? But we can be flexible, so you.
I have it written down here, I think, so let me look it up
We
here.
have the space until 2.
Okay, I think it said 11:50 to 12:20, so why don't we say 12:25? That'd be all right? Be back here at 12:25? Sounds good. Thank you for excellent question. Look forward to the next part.
Awesome, this one.
Thank you for excellent question. Look forward to the next part.
Awesome, this one.
Thank you for excellent question. Look forward to the next part.
Awesome, this one.
Thank you for excellent question. Look forward to the next part.
Awesome, this one.
Thank you for excellent question. Look forward to the next part.
Awesome, this one.
Thank you for excellent question. Look forward to the next part.
Awesome, this one.
Thank you for excellent question. Look forward to the next part.
Awesome, this one.
Thank you for excellent question. Look forward to the next part.
Awesome, this one.
Thank you for excellent question. Look forward to the next part.
Awesome, this one.
Thank you for excellent question. Look forward to the next part.
Awesome, this one.
Thank you for excellent question. Look forward to the next part.
Awesome, this one.
Thank you for excellent question. Look forward to the next part.
Awesome, this one.
Thank you for excellent question. Look forward to the next part.
Awesome, this one.
Thank you for excellent question. Look forward to the next part.
Awesome, this one.
Thank you for excellent question. Look forward to the next part.
Awesome, this one.
Thank you for excellent question. Look forward to the next part.
Awesome, this one.
Thank you for excellent question. Look forward to the next part.
Awesome, this one.
Thank you for excellent question. Look forward to the next part.
Awesome, this one.
Thank you for excellent question. Look forward to the next part.
Awesome, this one.
Thank you for excellent question. Look forward to the next part.
Awesome, this one.
Thank you for excellent question. Look forward to the next part.
Awesome, this one.
Thank you for excellent question. Look forward to the next part.
Awesome, this one.
Thank you for excellent question. Look forward to the next part.
Awesome, this one.
Thank you for excellent question. Look forward to the next part.
Awesome, this one.
Thank you for excellent question. Look forward to the next part.
Awesome, this one.
Thank you for excellent question. Look forward to the next part.
Awesome, this one.
Thank you for excellent question. Look forward to the next part.
Awesome, this one.
Thank you for excellent question. Look forward to the next part.
Awesome, this one.
Thank you for excellent question. Look forward to the next part.
Awesome, this one.
excellent question. Look forward to the next part.
Also need this link.
Thank you for excellent question. Look forward to the next part.
Also need this link.
Thank you for excellent question. Look forward to the next part.
Also need this link.
Thank you for excellent question. Look forward to the next part.
Also need this link.
Thank you for excellent question. Look forward to the next part.
Also need this link.
Thank you for excellent question. Look forward to the next part.
Also need this link.
Thank you for excellent question. Look forward to the next part.
Also need this link.
Thank you for excellent question. Look forward to the next part.
Also need this link.
Thank you for excellent question. Look forward to the next part.
Also need this link.
Thank you for excellent question. Look forward to the next part.
Also need this link.
Thank you for excellent question. Look forward to the next part.
Also need this link.
Thank you for excellent question. Look forward to the next part.
Also need this link.
Thank you for excellent question. Look forward to the next part.
Also need this link.
Thank you for excellent question. Look forward to the next part.
Also need this link.
Thank you for excellent question. Look forward to the next part.
Also need this link.
Thank you for excellent question. Look forward to the next part.
Also need this link.
Thank you for excellent question. Look forward to the next part.
Also need this link.
Thank you for excellent question. Look forward to the next part.
Also need this link.
Thank you for excellent question. Look forward to the next part.
Also need this link.
Thank you for excellent question. Look forward to the next part.
Also need this link.
Thank you for excellent question. Look forward to the next part.
Also need this link.
Thank you for excellent question. Look forward to the next part.
Also need this link.